Welcome to this video presentation of Movement Control Section, both in the United Nations headquarters and in the United Nations field mission. After this presentation, you should be able to explain the different responsibilities for the United Nations headquarters Movement Control Section and the mission Movement Control Section. Summarize the need of cooperation between the two movement control levels and between the United Nations Movement Control Sections and the troop or police contributor. Recall the most common mistakes made by the troop or police contributors in preparing for a United Nations movement. United Nations has movement control sections on two levels, strategic and tactical. United Nations do not use the operational level. The strategic level is the movement control section inside the United Nations headquarters in New York. Each of the United Nations missions has their own movement control section, named the Mission Movement Control Section. This slide describes the United Nations definition of a movement control. The two movement control sections are working on a different level with a very good cooperation and coordination. The United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section is responsible for the strategic movement to the mission. They work in close cooperation with the respective permanent missions and the movement control sections in each mission. United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section, together with the troop and police contributors, decides how to execute the movement. United Nations arranged or arranged by the troop or police contributor. United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section will recommend a reimbursement rate if the troop or police contributor executes the strategic movement themselves. Oversight of the movement control activities, both for the United Nations headquarters and the field mission, includes quality assurance, budgetary and financial, personnel and staffing, contract management, and procurement issues. This slide lists the different responsibilities between the troop or police contributors and the United Nations Headquarters Mission Control Section. Even if they have different responsibility, they need to work close together to be able to conduct the movement. The Mission Movement Control Section uses own military assets and contracted civilian assets like helicopters, aircrafts, barges, and trucks for the internal transportation in support of the mission. Besides that, they also support the strategic movement in close cooperation with the United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section and the troop or police contributors. Chief Mission Movement Control Section is normally a civilian, but often with a military background. The deputy is military, and the staff is a mix of civilian and military personnel. During the next few slides, we will look into different aspects to the movement control tasks in a mission. Rotation cell. They have the overall planning and coordination staff for all strategic movement. United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section are responsible for the aircraft or the vessel, but the Mission Movement Control Section is responsible for the passenger and the cargo. Log base. They will store troop or police contributor contingent owned equipment and United Nations owned equipment in the marshalling area before or after a strategic transport. They will also load and unload all vessels, trucks and aircrafts. They have the responsibility of all the United Nations containers in an area of responsibility in regard to tracking and certification. Freight units plans and execute the routine transport of cargo within the mission. They will also prioritize and authorize transport on already planned movements. Custom unit. Under the terms of the Status of Force Agreement, the United Nations and its agents and contractors can import goods in support of the mission free from duty and taxes. The custom unit is the focal point for the processing of documents related to the duty, tax-free, import-export of United Nations and contingent-owned equipment. Passenger unit plans and executes the routine and special flights transport of passengers within the mission area. Human remain repatriation are the United Nations' responsibility until it arrives the home country. United Nations has a detailed regulation how this should be executed. The Mission Movement Control Section will plan and coordinate these movements. Mission Movement Control Section supports the police or troop contributor in all movements related to task, info, insights, and out of the mission area. Mission Movement Control Section also participate in the pre-deployment visit to the troop or police contributor's country prior to their deployment. This slide is a lesson learned slide regarding movement control issues. The load lists are often not complete, and the stated dimensions are not in accordance with reality. Some nations have no qualified trained personnel to identify and handle dangerous goods. Therefore, it's often discovered dangerous goods on the load lists that are not identified by the troop or police contributors, and what is identified do not have sufficient documentation. In this regard, United Nations can support the troop or police contributor with trained personnel with dangerous goods experience. One of the challenges regarding calculating transport requirements based on packing in 20-foot containers is to assess the volume. Experience shows that volume often is underestimated by the troop or police contributor and therefore increases the needed transport capacity. Another challenge is that the troop or police contributors does not pack the 20-foot containers in a proper manner. Packing and marking are also often insufficient, causing damage to the equipment during transportation. Balancing the equipment weight inside the container are also often wrong and changes the center of gravity on the container. This creates large problems during the on- and offloading of the containers. If all these errors are not recognized in time, it will lead to major problems in connection with the actual deployment in the form of insufficient transport capacity, material damage, and, in the worst case, accident with serious personnel injury. We have in this presentation introduced you to the United Nations Movement Control Sections, both in the United Nations headquarters and in the United Nations field missions. Key takeaway: United Nations Headquarters Movement Control Section is responsible for the strategic movement in and out of a mission, and Mission Movement Control Section is responsible for the tactical movement inside the mission.